It was early morning. The sky hadn't fully turned blue. Bare autumn trees lined Summit Ridge, swaying gently in the cold wind. Inside the SUV, NPR played softly, peaceful to the point of sleepy. Lena Whitaker, 38, held a steel coffee mug in one hand as she drove, adjusting her coat belt with the other. She was used to starting earlier than her co-workers. Part discipline, part instinct. She preferred to avoid the morning stares, the kind that asked without words, "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Her black SUV rolled through an empty intersection. Suddenly, red and blue lights lit up in her mirrors. Lena pulled over calmly, her hands steady, but her eyes narrowed. She hadn't run a red light. She wasn't speeding. No phone, no violation, and no one else on the road. Just her and the cop. The window came down. Cold air swept in. The white officer, around 40, leaned into the frame with sunglasses and a judging stare. "Good morning. License and registration, please." She handed them over, right hand slowly. He barely glanced at them before asking, "So what brings you to this neighborhood this early?" Lena tilted her head slightly, pretending not to understand. "Driving to work." "Why?" The answer didn't please him. "We've had some unusual traffic around here lately. Folks don't usually cut through Summit Ridge unless they're up to something. You live here." She didn't, but she lived close and worked for an agency he couldn't imagine. Inside her palm, her silver ring spun once, a quiet habit to keep calm. She'd been pulled over 3 times this year, every time for a different excuse. But the root cause was always the same. She knew this game. Answer too fast. She's hiding something. Get frustrated. She's aggressive. Stay silent. She's uncooperative. "I'm on my way to the federal building on West 48th, she said slowly. A raised eyebrow, a full body scan from his eyes. Why would someone like her work there? Lena met his gaze. No fear, no reaction, just a stillness made of steel. He asked, "Mind if I take a look inside the vehicle?" That question, seemingly harmless, was the beginning of a mistake he couldn't undo. Lena Whitaker didn't move right away. She let the question hang in the chilled morning air. "Mind if I take a look inside the vehicle?" It wasn't really a request. It was a test of patience, of fear, of what he could get away with before someone noticed. She turned toward him with practiced stillness. "Is there a legal reason for a search?" she asked. Not defiant but deliberate. She knew the script better than he did. The officer's jaw tensed. He didn't expect her to speak the language of right so fluently. He looked over her shoulder at the back seat, then back at her face, as if trying to locate a reason that hadn't happened yet. "Just routine," he said. "You know, with all the carjackings lately, we've been asked to keep an eye out for anything out of place." "Carjackings?" Lena almost smiled. It was always something vague. Always something that sounded just official enough to hold up in court, but soft enough to disappear if pressed. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Inside her vehicle, mounted discreetly near the dashboard, a federal-issued dash cam had been recording since the moment the siren lights came on. She hadn't touched a thing. Standard protocol for internal investigators like her. No sudden moves, no negotiations, just capture the truth. As it is, when it thinks no one's watching, Lena worked in the Bureau's Office of Internal Responsibility. Her job was to investigate misconduct, often within law enforcement. She reviewed camera footage, body cam gaps, and policy violations buried in paperwork. She'd spent years building cases against officers who looked just like the one standing outside her window now. Some of them had been charming. Most had been sloppy. All of them believed no one was watching. But Lena wasn't just watching. She was recording. And she wasn't here by accident. Today she was on her way to a closed-door meeting at the federal building. Ironically, about increasing accountability in suburban precincts. She looked up at the officer, still standing there like her silence was a personal insult. "If you'd like to issue a citation," she said finally, "I'd be happy to contest it formally." Her voice was even, almost gentle, but underneath steel. The officer stepped back, annoyed but uncertain. He wasn't sure how to proceed. He could escalate, call backup, claim she was uncooperative, or he could let it go and pretend it never happened. His hand hovered near his radio. She saw it, logged it mentally, said nothing. Then she reached down, not fast, not threatening, and pressed her thumb against a small flat button beneath the steering column. A silent ping was sent directly to Bureau Systems. Nothing flashy, just a timestamp, a location, a signal that the situation had crossed a line. And back at headquarters, someone had just received it. Lena sat still for a few more seconds, giving herself space to breathe. The coffee in her cup holder had gone lukewarm, untouched since the lights flashed behind her. Her thumb lingered near the panic button, not out of fear, but out of calculation. It wasn't the first time she'd had to weigh the moment, when to speak, when to wait, when to remind someone carefully that she wasn't just another silhouette in the driver's seat. She glanced in the side mirror. The patrol car behind her didn't move. No second officer, no backup yet, which meant he was still deciding what kind of morning this would be. Lena's training didn't prepare her for street encounters like this. Not directly, but her instincts were razor sharp. She had interviewed over 50 officers suspended for misconduct. She had memorized the micro-patterns, the tightening jaw, the pacing, the coded language that always came before poor decisions. She wasn't afraid of Dean Lay. Not really. She was afraid of what he represented. The casual entitlement, the assumption of guilt assigned to skin before speech, the belief that authority didn't need to justify itself when no one was watching. Haley stepped back to his vehicle and made a show of checking her documents. Though he hadn't even typed anything into his in-car terminal, it was theater one performed daily, unseen and unchallenged. He tapped the trunk of her SUV as if testing it for weakness. Lena narrowed her eyes. That tap offhand, territorial, was exactly the kind of detail that would never show up in reports, but meant everything to someone paying attention. Inside the federal building, she was addressed as Agent Whitaker. Her name sat on reports circulated to Washington. She ran policy reviews and ethics compliance. She signed off on disciplinary action for officers who used their badge as a weapon. But out here, none of that mattered. She was black. She was alone. And she was in the wrong zip code. She remembered a hearing just 2 months ago when a young officer from a neighboring precinct defended an unjustified stop by saying she looked out of place. That was it. 4 words. Out of place. That was all it took. Rayleigh returned to her window now with a hint of smug certainty. Everything seems clean, he said, but didn't hand back her license yet. Just being cautious, with everything going on in the news lately. Lena's voice didn't waver. You stopped me without cause. That's not caution. That's profiling. He bristled. Ma'am, I'm just trying to keep the community safe. That line, she'd heard it 100 times. Safe was the word they used to justify control. Safety meant silence. Safety meant obedience. And when someone like her didn't comply exactly the way they expected, safety became the excuse to escalate. You've seen my ID, she said, her tone colder now. You've had my registration. You've inspected my vehicle visually. Unless you plan to file a report, I suggest you return my license. He hesitated. The moment lingered too long. His authority was shrinking slowly, subtly, but Lena could feel it. It's what happens when a system built on instinct runs into someone who knows the rules better than the enforcers do. Then, as if trying to reassert control, he glanced into the back seat again. What's in the case? He asked, nodding toward a black hard-shell briefcase beside her laptop bag. Documents, she answered. May I take a look? He raised an eyebrow. She met it with silence. There was a tension there that went beyond this stop. It was institutional, historic. Her father had taught her as a teenager what to do when not if she was pulled over. Her brother hadn't been so lucky. A minor citation had turned into an arrest. That arrest had turned into 2 years of missed college, legal fees, and a permanent record. That's what made her furious. Not the inconvenience, not the disrespect, but the fact that this wasn't a mistake. This was a pattern. Her silence was louder than anger. Rayleigh shifted his weight again. "Where did you say you worked?" "I didn't." Another long beat. Then he handed her license back. "All right," he said, but there was no apology. Just an exhale. "Drive safe." She took the license, put it away, didn't thank him. As she pulled off the shoulder, Lena didn't speed away. She drove slowly, deliberately, letting his car shrink in the mirror. She knew he was watching. Men like him always watched until they couldn't anymore. 5 minutes later, she arrived at the parking garage below the federal building. The guard at the gate recognized her instantly. "Morning, Agent Whitaker." "Morning," she said. As the gate lifted, she felt her shoulders begin to relax, just a little, but the pressure didn't fade completely. Not yet. She parked, shut off the engine, and sat in the silence of the SUV. She reached for her phone, opened the secure recording app tied to the Bureau's internal system. She uploaded the footage from the encounter, filed it under Unjustified Stop, Suburban Precinct 6A, added a note. Subject did not cite legal cause, showed resistance to procedural clarity, dash cam footage active throughout. She didn't need to be angry in the report. She just needed it to exist because the truth didn't always roar. Sometimes it just waited, documented, dated, filed, ready. Lena hadn't planned to mention the stop. She rarely did. Encounters like that had a way of lingering quietly. Too small to spark outrage, too common to report. But something about the officer's smirk, the way he said "drive safe," like he still owned the last word, stayed with her longer than it should have. She carried it with her up the elevator through the security doors into the glass-walled meeting room where 3 other agents were already waiting. She sat down, opened her laptop, and pulled up the file. The video clip had already been uploaded, time-stamped, synced with her ID. The first point of shift came not from what happened to Lena, but from what she decided to do with it. At 8:06 a.m., she forwarded the footage to Special Agent in Charge Deborah Clean with a simple message. "Surveillance field incident. Suggest review. Possible pattern match." Deborah was tough, sharp, and importantly white. She responded in under 5 minutes. "I'll bring this to oversight." "You okay?" Lena replied. "I'm fine. Just tired." It wasn't a lie. It wasn't the whole truth either. By noon, word had reached the Bureau's internal affairs team. Not because Lena made a scene, but because her stop mirrored 2 others from the same precinct, both involving black professionals driving in or near Summit Ridge. None had filed formal complaints. All had been recorded on similar dashcams. Lena's case, however, was different. She was one of theirs, and that changed everything. The second point of shift came from outside Lena's control. Dean Lay had no idea his casual stop was about to land on the desk of someone who outranked every supervisor he'd ever answered to. Around 1:30 p.m., he received a formal contact notice from a Bureau liaison requesting clarification about a morning stop involving a federal agent. He was told to submit a written report within 24 hours. At first, he didn't panic. He figured he could explain it, call it a routine patrol, a misread situation. But when he logged into the portal and saw the timestamp matched Lena Whitaker's plate, his stomach turned. He'd heard her name before somewhere. And then it hit him. She'd been quoted in a departmental memo on racial bias protocols. He paced for 15 minutes before sitting down to write the report. He didn't lie, not fully, but he left out the wrong neighborhood comment. He avoided the bit about asking to search her vehicle without probable cause. He said she was calm, non-cooperative, and that he felt it prudent to assess her presence due to increased criminal activity in the area. It was textbook cover language, ambiguous enough to dodge consequences, or so he thought. The third point of shift came when the footage was played aloud. At 410 To and Tom, the Bureau's internal review board met in a closed session. Lena wasn't in the room, but her voice was calm, even sharp. The phrase, "That's not caution. That's profiling," hit like a quiet bullet. The moment he tapped the trunk, the pause when she refused to open the briefcase, the request to take a quick look inside. The review board watched in silence. Not because the video was dramatic, but because it wasn't. It was routine, and that made it worse. They saw the moment power shifted from unspoken authority to conscious restraint. Lena never raised her voice. She never revealed her badge. She didn't need to. Her presence, her silence, her refusal to perform the script expected of her. Those were her weapons. The board made 3 decisions by 500 come. First, they would formally audit Dean Lee's stop history for the past 12 months. Second, they would notify the precinct commander of a pending ethics review. And third, they would recommend using Lena's footage in a new training module. Bias in practice, recognizing the non-obvious patterns. Lena didn't hear about any of it until the next morning. When she arrived at her office, Deborah handed her a sealed folder. Inside was a memo marked Confidential Internal Action. It listed her name as field contributor and detailed the recommendations approved by the oversight panel. At the bottom was a handwritten note. "You did the right thing. Quiet counts too." Lena didn't smile. She didn't feel victorious. She felt measured, a little heavier maybe, but not alone. She left the folder on her desk and walked to the window below. The city moved in slow patterns, people crossing streets, buses hissing to a halt, bikes weaving between cars, nothing remarkable. But for the first time in a long while, Lena allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the right kind of silence could shift something. After all, it started with a video, but it didn't end there. A week after the footage of Lena's stop was submitted, an internal analytics team flagged a pattern. Same precinct, same neighborhood, same hour of day. The officers changed. The excuses shifted, but the targets rarely did. Black drivers, especially women, were stopped more often near Summit Ridge than anywhere else in the surrounding city. And none of those stops resulted in arrests. None revealed contraband. But every single one was logged as preventative. That word preventative had become a shield. Lena watched the numbers accumulate on her screen. They didn't scream. They whispered. A quiet, damning accumulation of unchecked power. Her case wasn't unique. It was typical. That was the real danger. She forwarded the report to Deputy Director Ramos with a short note. "This isn't about, it's about culture." Ramos responded in person. He stopped by her office 2 days later, leaned on the doorframe like a man carrying too many decisions, and said, "I need you to brief Justice." She looked up. "You mean the DOJ?" He nodded. "And not just on your case on this." He pointed to the report still glowing on her screen. That's when Lena realized this wasn't a sidebar anymore. This was becoming a case file with legs. The Department of Justice scheduled a private policy briefing. Lena wasn't alone. The Oversight Committee sent 2 other agents, one focused on behavioral analysis, the other on procedural equity. They sat in a beige room with a long wooden table across from 4 federal attorneys and a civil rights liaison. Lena walked them through the footage, not just hers. 2 other clips showed similar exchanges. Different officers, same language. "You don't look like you're from around here. Just a precaution. We've had break-ins." She let the silence do the work between clips. Then she pulled up the precinct's stop history overlaid with demographic heat maps. The disparity was not arguable. It was math. One of the attorneys leaned forward. "This was never reported to IA." "No formal complaints," Lena replied. "But most people who get stopped like this, they don't complain. They just want to get home." The DOJ rep scribbled something on her legal pad. No one said anything for a moment. Lena continued. "This isn't about bad apples," she said, her voice steady. "It's about the environment that tells those apples they'll never rot." They ask questions, smart ones, about policy, about training, about oversight models. Lena answered each with the quiet authority of someone who spent years listening to excuses from men who believed the rules didn't apply to them. When the meeting ended, the liaison stood up and said, "We'll be issuing a recommendation, not just to that precinct, but to every suburban department with similar metrics." Lena nodded. She didn't smile, but something in her chest lifted. That same week, the Bureau's internal ethics panel issued a memo. All officers in zones flagged for demographic disparity would be required to undergo mandatory review, partially informed by Lena's footage. Her recording, once an isolated act of self-preservation, was now federal training material. Meanwhile, Officer Deanley's record was reopened. 5 prior stops, each one previously dismissed, were now under formal review. The officer who had once smirked at Lena's restraint was suddenly answering questions he couldn't brush off. But the shift wasn't just bureaucratic. It was cultural. Lena began receiving emails. Quiet ones from other agents, officers, even dispatchers. Saw the training video. Thank you. I didn't realize how bad it looked until I watched it back. You held your ground. That means more than you know. Some were from women. Some were from people who'd never been stopped, but had always suspected the weight wasn't distributed evenly. Lena read each one, but responded to only a few. She wasn't interested in applause. She was interested in follow-through. One email stood out. It came from a black sergeant in a neighboring county. He wrote, "My niece drives through that neighborhood every morning to get to school. I used to tell her to keep her head down. Now I tell her to keep a dash cam. It's not justice yet, but it's a start." Lena printed that one and taped it inside her locker because it reminded her what happened that morning wasn't just about a single stop. It was about the invisible script written into sidewalks, into silence, into the way some neighborhoods were allowed to feel protected and others were policed. It took a federal badge, a hidden camera, and a whole lot of quiet endurance to prove what thousands already knew. And even then, she knew it wasn't enough. But it was movement. Lena stood in front of her bathroom mirror. Tie undone. Jacket still on hours after the day had ended. Her apartment was quiet. Just the hum of the city pressing faintly against the window. She didn't feel like a hero. She didn't even feel victorious. What she felt was something colder, something steadier, a sense of moral weight finally being noticed, but not yet lifted. She replayed the stop in her head for the 100th time, not because she doubted her actions, but because she knew how close it had come to going differently. What if she had spoken faster or moved more quickly? What if her voice had cracked? What if she hadn't been FBI? That last one haunted her the most. She thought about all the drivers who wouldn't have had the badge, the recording, or the privilege of being believed. For every Lena Whitaker with federal credentials, there were thousands of women just like her. Same skin, same voice, same zip code, who never got to submit a clip, never saw their footage turned into policy. Justice, she realized, didn't always look like a courtroom. Sometimes it looked like a document quietly refiled. Sometimes it looked like a new training video sent out to 1,000 inboxes. Sometimes it looked like a man being forced to rethink a decision he once thought harmless. But justice, real justice, had to go deeper. It had to be imagined differently. Couldn't depend on who held the badge. It couldn't rely on who had the camera. It had to be built into the very instinct of those who swore to protect. The next morning, Lena showed up to work early. She wore the same jacket from that day, the one she'd worn when she was stopped, but this time she pinned a small lapel beneath the collar. It wasn't standard issue. It was a gift from a colleague who'd watched the footage and simply said, "You reminded me what this Abby Eyes is supposed to be." She went into the conference room and pulled up the latest draft of the training module. Her voice narrated the clip, now calm, measured. She didn't perform outrage. She performed accountability. She hit play. The screen showed the moment of pause. The silence, the question, "Mind if I take a look inside the vehicle?" Then her voice steady. "Is there a legal reason for a search?" It was subtle, but it was a shift. Justice didn't roar in that clip. It didn't arrest anyone, but it told the truth. And for now, that was enough. For now, she was content knowing the next officer to watch this footage would hear her voice before making the same mistake. And maybe, just maybe, that would change something. We tell ourselves justice is blind, that it doesn't see skin or badge or neighborhood. But what if justice isn't blind at all? What if it sees everything and simply chooses where to look? Lena Whitaker didn't raise her voice. She didn't pull rank. She let the system catch itself in the mirror. And when it did, it flinched. This story wasn't about a broken law. It was about a broken habit. The reflex to doubt, to stop, to assert power when none was needed. It was about the quiet ways dignity gets tested and the quieter ways people fight back. So tonight, ask yourself, in a country where silence is survival, what does it take to speak without raising your? Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.